Welcome back to Eat Sleep Boxing Repeats YouTube channel. Delighted to be joined by Owen and Paul. We're here for another fantasy fights discussion. We did Tyson Fury last month. This time we are talking about the recently retired former world champion Amir Khan, who had a long career, fought in various world title fights. Obviously ended his career with that fight against Kell Brook. But just fought some great fights. Fought Canelo, fought McDonough, fought Paulie Malignaggi. Such a fantastic career. Had some great fights in the States as well. Looking forward to discussing some fancy fights, gents. But yeah, thanks for joining me. How are both of you?
Yeah, I'm all good, mate. All good. Thanks. Looking forward to this. Very interested to see your thoughts, both of you.
Yeah, delighted to be back for another video, and again, likewise, very interested to see some potentially controversial opinions.
Yeah, that's good. I feel like we had a few disagreements for the Tyson Fury video, so we'll see if there's something similar going on for this one. Just for people watching, although this is like a fantasy fights video, but this is more just kind of fights that maybe didn't happen. We're going to be talking about fights that another time could have happened, where perhaps rumored to happen at one point. We're not going to be kind of going back to the 60s and the 70s like we did with the Tyson Fury video. It's just, yeah, fights that didn't happen. They can still be fantasy fights though. Going to get straight into this one, guys. Amir Khan was rumored at various times in his career to be Floyd Mayweather's next opponent. As you know, Mayweather retired undefeated on 50-0. Some people think that Amir Khan would have given him some serious trouble. Some people maybe even think that he could have beaten Mayweather. But yeah, this isn't. Yeah, really interested to get your thoughts on this one. Owen, going to go to you, mate. How would that fight have played out? Do you think? Go into it for us.
I am very much in the camp of when it was first rumored to be happening. Amir Khan would have given Floyd Mayweather a lot of trouble. Whether he beats him or not is a different story. I do sit on the fence with that, but the Amir Khan that went in against, like you said, Malignaggi, went in against Maidana. I mean, he went in against Maidana, who was a killer, outboxed him and took his biggest shots, who, like we say, was a killer at the time. So I do believe it would have gone to points, but I think it would have been closer, in my opinion, than a lot of people give Khan credit for. And I do think he takes a lot of the rounds purely because Khan would have just gave him an onslaught. He would have just ran at him. 5, 6, 7 punch combos. And as good as Mayweather is, hit and don't get hit. If you fight a prime Amir Khan, you're going to get hit. Simple as that, in my opinion. I think Floyd probably would have edged it on the cards because it's Floyd. As good as he was, you're in his backyard. If it's not convincing, you're not beating him. But I do think Khan seriously troubles Mayweather if they fought at the right time.
And do you think that Khan would have troubled Mayweather if you look at like the second half of Floyd Mayweather's career, like the period when he was kind of going the distance more than stopping people? And do you think then he would have given Mayweather the most trouble out of anyone else? As we saw, Mayweather went up against Manny Pacquiao, for example, and didn't look too troubled. There were some other fights where everyone thought this is going to be the guy to beat Mayweather, and it didn't happen. Do you think that Amir Khan would have given Mayweather the most trouble out of anyone in the second half of his career?
Yeah, I do. I think purely because when Khan was a young boy in the Olympics, coming through the pro ranks, that was when we had Pretty Boy Floyd. Then when Khan started to get to world level fights, that was when we got Money Mayweather, the hit and don't get hit. So I feel like Pretty Boy Floyd could have stopped him because people don't give him the credit for the power he had, and he almost chose when he wanted to stop fighters. But when he become the hit and move, hit and don't get hit, I do think that's when the 5, 6, 7 punch combinations from Khan would have given him the most trouble, definitely.
Interesting stuff. Okay, Paul, what's your response?
Yeah, I think that's a brilliant assessment there from Owen. I do agree with him in the sense that I think Khan would have given him trouble. I think it would have been inevitable that, Owen mentioned the 5, 6, 7 punch combinations that Khan throws, at least a few of them are going to land at stages in the fight. But I think with Mayweather, we're talking about a guy who, not saying he has the best defense ever, but definitely one in recent times. His defense and his movement is some of the best we've seen in the modern era. I think his ability to do the shoulder roll and just, see exactly where the shot's coming from almost before the fighter throwing it. It's even thrown it. He knows what they're going to throw already. Yeah, no, you know what? It was a fight that I really wanted to happen at one stage, but I do agree with what Owen said about, I think Mayweather would have won, but I would maybe edge it a little bit more convincingly in Mayweather's favor. If it's a 12-round fight, I'd maybe say 9-3, 8-4 minimum in favor of Mayweather. I think he was kind of the expert of just doing enough to win the rounds. Like you mentioned the Pacquiao fight there. In the end, it wasn't close on the scorecards, but while people were watching, a lot of people did say that they thought Pacquiao had done enough in most of the rounds. But Mayweather was the king of just doing enough in the rounds, winning it by a few punches or a few seconds. And I think he would have done that again. You can't ignore the wins that Mayweather's had in his career. Manny Pacquiao, Maidana twice, Canelo, Miguel Cotto, Guerrero, Victor Ortiz, Shane Mosley, Juan Manuel Marquez, De La Hoya. You could go on. Obviously, Ricky Hatton and a few other ones as well throughout his whole career. And I just think, unfortunately, from a British perspective, Amir Khan would have been another one on the record of Floyd Mayweather.
Yeah, I feel like when we have these discussions, you can't remember fights that you might have forgotten about, and I just feel like there's so many fights that Mayweather's had that haven't been that close. Like Juan Manuel Marquez is another one I'd completely forgotten about, and the reason I forgot about it is because it just wasn't a close. Despite Marquez being a great fighter, it just wasn't a close fight. So yeah, what a career. It's it's really interesting to talk about. So just to confirm, both of you are saying Mayweather on points. That would have been your prediction going into that fight.
I just think slightly closer than Paul.
Yeah. It's interesting. Yeah, it's an interesting one to debate. And like, just one for you, Paul, which the same question is asked to Owen. At his time, was Amir Khan Floyd Mayweather's biggest threat at one point? Would you say? I know it's hard to kind of go back in time and think about it that deeply, but what's your opinion on that?
There was probably a time there, when you're thinking, right, is he going to fight Khan next? I just want to see him fight Khan. But then to maybe say that he was his biggest threat, I maybe wouldn't agree with that, because, obviously the Pacquiao saga went on for ages. So I think vast majority of boxing fans would have said, no, until the fight, Manny Pacquiao is the biggest threat to Floyd Mayweather. But bar Pacquiao, after, those names I mentioned there that Mayweather beat, after that and nearing towards, the last 10 fights of his career, I think you're probably right in saying that Khan definitely would have been, at least as a name, one of the trickiest for Mayweather.
Yeah, okay, cool. All right, cool. Good evaluation, gents. We'll move on to the next fight. Amir Khan against Manny Pacquiao. This fight kind of gets the mouth, in my opinion, gets the mouth watering a little bit more, just because you can guarantee it's going to be possibly a more exciting fight than the Mayweather fight, possibly. Maybe I'm a bit biased, big Pacquiao fan, but I think the rumors were stronger that these two were actually going to fight at one point. When there was one point, I think, didn't Amir Khan come out and say, yeah, the fight's done, and then Manny Pacquiao came out and said, no, it's not, and then it didn't happen. So it was really, really unfortunate. It should have happened, really. They were both at welterweight for a long time. I think they were quite close as well. I think they were quite chummy, from what I remember. But yeah, the fight didn't happen. Also want to just confirm this. We're talking about this fight at welterweight. Obviously, they both competed at weights below that weight. So I want to know what you guys think, who would have been better at the 147-pound limit. But yeah, again, not sure what you guys are going to say on this one, really. With the Mayweather one, I was confident both of you were going to go towards Mayweather, but wasn't 100% sure. Paul, going to go to you first here, mate. What are your thoughts on this one?
Yes, again, another great fight, and it's just a shame we never got to see it. But although Mayweather beat Pacquiao, and I would have always regarded Mayweather as better than Pacquiao, I think Pacquiao would have won this more emphatically than Mayweather. And the reason I'm saying that is I just think that at the time there, Manny Pacquiao did carry dynamite in his hands. And I think that, I'm not saying, I think Amir Khan gets a lot of stick for everyone saying that he's a glass jaw. And I don't think that's the case whatsoever. The fighters he did lose to, it was a matter of getting caught cold a few times, and then, fighting at a weight which he wasn't really supposed to be fighting at, like the Canelo fight. Okay, that was a knockout loss, but he was fighting well above his natural weight there. And you look at the ones to Terence Crawford and Kell Brook at the end of his career, but Khan's come out and said recently that he knew after the Canelo fight that he was kind of nearing the end. But the amount of shots Khan's taken over the years, okay, they've wobbled him and his legs have stiffened up, but the amount of times he still stayed on his feet, it is kind of commendable. However, I just think that with Manny Pacquiao, if you're talking about Pacquiao in his prime against Khan in his prime, yes, Khan I think would maybe even be ahead on the cards, winning rounds, but just I can't get out of my head Pacquiao landing a big hook or a big straight down the pipe and knocking him down, then following up and probably stopping Khan. I'm not going to list them all off again, but like I did with Mayweather, some of the wins that Manny Pacquiao has is just ridiculous. And when I'm comparing the people he's beaten to Amir Khan, I know styles make fights and that old cliche, but I just think that I'd have to say a mid to late round stoppage in favour of Manny Pacquiao in this one.
Mid to late round stoppage, Manny Pacquiao. And just to push you further on that, would you think these scorecards would have been tight and close when that stoppage would have come about, or do you think Pacquiao would have been wide ahead?
No, I wouldn't have said Pacquiao would have been miles ahead. I would maybe have said that Khan would have come out and maybe could have been 2-3 rounds up, won the good first few rounds with the combination punching, and avoiding Pacquiao. But gradually, as the fight grew on and Khan was maybe getting a bit more tired, I could see it a stoppage coming, 7, 8, 9 around then. So yeah, if it had have been, I would have said it would maybe have been 4 apiece. Say it was the 8th round or 9th round, yeah, about 4 apiece, maybe even in favour of Amir Khan. I don't think it would have been beyond the realms of possibility.
Okay. Owen, what about you? Do you agree with Paul, or are you going the other way?
I agree on the method, but I disagree on how late. I think it would be done a lot sooner. As good as Khan was, and I love Amir Khan, I think he's a great ambassador for British boxing. But I think, like Paul said, there was a time and there was a point in time when Manny Pacquiao literally had fists of dynamite and he would run through people in 3 or 4 rounds. It got to a stage where if you were fighting Pacquiao, it was almost like Hyde. He went through, I had a look earlier, I think he had something like 7 or 8 stoppages on the bounce around the 30, 31, 32 fight point of his career. And I don't think any of the stoppages went past 6 rounds. I think there was just a point where he knew the dynamite he had in his hands and there was no fear about what's coming back. I'm not sure if that's because of where he's from and the style of fighter, but he was just something else at that stage. And I do think with him, he have a tendency to leave his chin high and go in to try and bamboozle with his combinations. And I do think Pacquiao would land even just a simple jab hook and it'd be good night for Amir Khan. And I do think Pacquiao would have got him out within 5.
Neck on the line, big like that prediction. Cool. Okay, it's interesting. I really wish we could have seen that fight. I think there was from what I remember, there was a good chance of that fight happening in the UK. But yeah, never mind. That's boxing for you. All right, gents, we've covered Mayweather, we've covered Pacquiao, but this is the one possibly looking forward to the most. Amir Khan versus Ricky Hatton. Just want to point out first, I think if this fight had happened at the right time, I think it would have been massive. It would have been a stadium fight, in my opinion. We're all aware of the popularity of Ricky Hatton. Would have been a great storyline, but yeah, unfortunately, we never got to see it. Another thing I want to point out is that Ricky Hatton had like a fabulous, amazing career. Had all those nights in Vegas. Really very memorable career, legend of British sports, but he didn't have that big domestic rivalry that still gets spoken about today, like Amir Khan had with Kell Brook, like Carl Froch and George Groves had. And it is what it is. You can't kind of help that, but that's one thing that I think is missing from his career, is that big domestic grudge match. There was that fight with Junior Wister as well that never happened. But anyway, Amir Khan against Ricky Hatton. Again, at welterweight, I know that Ricky Hatton spent a lot of his time at 140 pounds, but we're talking about this fight as a welterweight fight. Go to you, Owen, on this one first. What are your thoughts?
I think the fight goes one of two ways. It's either Amir Khan points or Ricky Hatton knockout, and I will comfortably again put my neck on the line and say an Amir Khan points victory. Ricky Hatton was your typical fireworks fighter, get his head in, and he loved to brawl. And I think if Amir Khan could keep his head on his shoulders for 12 rounds, box to the game plan, box sensibly, I don't think Hatton would be able to get near him in that sense. I do think Khan's feet would be a lot faster than many of the fighters Hatton's been in with, especially some of the fighters he's caught cold. And I do think Khan would outbox him personally.
Okay. I can see by Paul's face he wants to say something. So over 12 rounds you would have picked Amir Khan to beat Ricky Hatton on points.
Quite comfortable on points as well.
Yeah, big statement. And is that just because you think Khan would have been too quick for him? You wouldn't have been able to have been caught by by Hatton? Yeah, like how can you like go into a bit deeper into how like the kind of the story of the fight would have gone?
Yeah, I think the story of the fight, the way I think it would go is Hatton's going to be looking for a knockout in that fight. I mean, to be fair, even against Mayweather, you could see he was looking for the knockout. It's just the way, it's just the fire inside him. He just needs to knock people out. I think when they would have clashed, Amir Khan was coming to his peak, whilst Ricky Hatton was at his peak. But whilst Khan was at that peak, that's when we're going to go back to the Maidana fight. That's the one I use as my example. Maidana landed bomb after bomb. And like Paul said, it was a little bit disrespectful with the glass chin. And the Maidana fight always comes to fruition when you talk about that. And I do think at that stage, I don't think Ricky Hatton would have knocked him out. I think he would have been behind on the scorecards, and I think he would have been chasing the knockout. And when he's chasing it against someone like Khan, if he keeps his head, if he doesn't get greedy and he keeps to the game plan, I do think he'd just box his head off. I mean, Ricky Hatton, if he catches him, it's the story of, it's a boxing cliche. If he catches anyone, the chances are they're going out. Because again, for a man his size, he had fantastic power. And a lot of fighters have felt that. But I just think Khan would have been, at that age, would have been clever enough to avoid it, keep off the ropes, keep out of the corners, take centre of the ring and try and control the fight. Even if he has to step off on the back foot, which I'd imagine in that fight he would on a lot of occasions. But I do just think if he can get his jab flowing, then Hatton won't get near him. But I can see Paul's smile that he's edging to get his point in.
Yeah, good stuff. And with that, we'll go to Paul now to get his thoughts.
Yeah, I think, Owen, you've made some really valid points there. And I don't know about you, but I personally found this one, of the three that we were discussing, I found this one the toughest to call. I've come to a decision on it, but I think this one, it was kind of like, you can make so many cases for either man here. I think when you're looking at Ricky Hatton, when you're looking at him, when the wins over Costa Zoo, Castillo, Malignaggi, he's got some really good names on his resume. And you'd probably say that Hatton's peak was around the Costa Zoo fight, pre-Mayweather. And then obviously in the Mayweather fight, we've seen the clip so many times. Early on, Hatton did wobble Mayweather, and did try and take him out of there. Obviously, it ended up in a stoppage defeat the other way around for Mayweather late on. And I don't know whether, I think it's impossible. I don't think Khan would have kept Hatton off for the full 12 rounds. I think it would have been inevitable that Hatton would have landed at some stage or another, like for 36 minutes for Amir Khan to box probably on the back foot and try and avoid Hatton's punches. Yes, he would have done it quite a good bit, but there's going to be at least a couple of times there that Hatton is going to land. But in saying that, I have actually gone for Khan as well, and I do think that he would have won it on points, potentially getting dropped at some stage in the fight, coming back, biting down on the gum shield, outboxing Ricky Hatton as well. And I think one other thing that I'd like to mention is that I know you could argue both of these aren't natural welterweights, but if the fight was to happen at 147, he's not a huge amount bigger, but just the way Khan's a little bit taller. He does stand a good bit taller, and with the way Hatton boxes, kind of tucking up and bobbing and weaving as well, it makes him a bit of a smaller target. So I think it would have been more difficult for him to reach Khan's chin. But yeah, it's such a difficult one to be quite honest with you. It's like, as I'm talking about this, I'm starting to think, actually, hold on, would I favour Hatton? But I'm going to stick with my original prediction and say, yeah, I think Amir Khan would have come through a really close fight and won. Maybe not a unanimous decision, maybe a split decision or a majority decision. Wouldn't surprise me if it was a draw on the cards.
Interesting. All right, gents. I think we are out of time. I think just going to make a final point here. I think that Amir Khan had such a long career, and in my opinion, was past his best for so long. I.e., even when he fought Canelo, which was 4 or 5 years ago, he did very well in that fight, but he was past his best then. And people need to understand, remember, and appreciate how good a peak Amir Khan was, i.e. Maidana, Judah, Malinaji, who he obviously beat all of them. So yeah, I think people just remember Amir Khan as the guy who kind of got knocked up by Canelo, stopped by Kell Brook, lost a couple of others as well. But no, fantastic fighter, and been a pleasure talking to the two of you about some fights that, fancy fights we didn't see, fights we'll never see, unfortunately. But yeah, real pleasure catching up with you, gents, and we'll be back next month to discuss fantasy fights for a different fighter. Thanks very much, guys.